Hello, hello, hello. Happy holidays, and welcome to a special Boxing Day edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie, and we just got done celebrating the holidays. That's why this week's episode is one day later than usual. Shut up, all of you. Stop complaining. You're fine. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas. UFC 232 is what we are here to discuss today, Phil. And at the risk of just doing our usual bit of pretending nothing unusual has happened, I am instead going to hand the discussion of this whole event being moved on a week's notice from Vegas to California over to you with the simple prompt, what the fuck? Thoughts?
Yeah. So I said this on Twitter, and I think there's a solid argument that this is the single discrete worst thing the UFC's ever done. Like, in terms of, I mean, there are certain like elements of their business model you could look at and say, oh yeah, that's terrible. Just the general things like the percentage of fighter pay,
sure,
which comes out of their revenue. You can look at little elements of it, but in terms of like discrete decisions that they've made, I think the Reebok deal has always been the worst thing that they've done. Mm-hmm. And this may be the new number one just for the sheer awful fucking greed and the absolute casual fucking over of their most loyal fans and their like all their fighters apart from the one that they know will make them the most money.
Yes, the middle class of fighters they have worked so hard in recent memory to crush, they are now just kicking them down the road like an empty can. Like, sorry, we're going to the California Commission now. So you must, if you're listening to this, you must know what's going on. But just for some background, this feels like good broadcasting to give you at least a little bit of context. Jon Jones popped on a USADA test for some amount of, I believe, Phil, the number was 60 picograms, which I believe is enough Turinabol to let him punch as hard as 60 Aaron Picos, which is terrifying in its own right. But there's been all sorts of bullshit excuses being made. Frankly, I don't have a problem calling them bullshit excuses about how these are leftover samples from his previous test. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about PED testing anyway. There's obviously an appeal to the idea of performing without cheating. I also don't like the way most testing is carried out. And, I don't know. I don't wonder if there isn't for a lot of athletes a legitimate case for, like steroids being good for you in certain quantities. All of that set aside, it's outrageous that just to keep Jon Jones on this date, like, clearly they're pushing for some kind of big financial goal at the end of 2018 or something. It's greed, as you said it. It's corruption and outright greed. They are moving an entire event with, 12 other bouts booked, 24 other people whose livelihoods are also depending on fighting on this date, much more so for most of them than the likes of Jon Jones, just so that Jon Jones can stay on the top of this card. Say nothing for what it means for Alexander Gustafsson that the UFC has what I think most people read as blatant attempts to cover up the sort of misconduct that they themselves pretend to be invested in rooting out. It's insulting to basically every single person on this card who isn't Jon Jones. It's insulting and yeah, it sucks. It's dumb. So I don't know. Is that going to color our analysis of these fights? That's the question, because today, let's see, just before we do anything else, we're going to talk about the main event, of course, Jon Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson, I guess for the vacant light heavyweight title or for the interim title?
I think it's vacant.
Vacant. All right.
I think it'll be vacant like as they step in. I think they've been a little circumspect about this in the same way that they were with the whole Khabib Nurmagomedov situation, is that they've made sure like it's not going to be vacant until someone steps in there. Yeah, it's not at all, cynical and dumb. And then we're also going to talk about the women's featherweight title fight. Again, this is a very good card. There's a lot of good stuff to like on this card.
So all of this aside, like there's definitely still some good technique and strategy and matchups to discuss. So we're still going to get to the good stuff, even if we started off on a slightly annoyed note. The co-main event, women's featherweights, Chris Cyborg, the featherweight champ, defending in essentially a super fight against the bantamweight champ, Amanda Nunez. That is very enticing. And then we're going to wrap things up talking about the main card opener, quite possibly one of the very best fights on the card and one of the better, more interesting contenders type matchups available in the UFC right now, I think. Chad Mendez, after his triumphant return over Miles Jury, is taking on Alexander Volkanovski, who has been just wrecking and destroying people the way that, Chad Mendez used to. So, very good fights. More besides that we'll probably try to get to in a bonus episode on the Heavy Hands Patreon. But back to the man whose actions have whose alleged actions have led to the moving of this entire card to a new location on just a week's notice. Jon Jones is fighting Alexander Gustafsson for the second time. I think the proper way to jump into this, because it is a rematch, Phil, is to posit the question, how close was the first fight, really, between Jon Jones and Alexander Gustafsson?
It was quite close, but not nearly as close as people made it seem. I think it was a significant case of challenger bias against someone who was considered to be totally unstoppable at his weight class, and a minus. What was Gustafsson in that fight? I think he was like a minus. He was a plus 600, 700 underdog. He was something very
something like that. It's hard to think in recent memory of another fighter who has had the same aura of invincibility that Jones had at that time.
Yeah. And instead, Gustafsson was competitive in every single round. He managed to hurt and, if not, stun and rock Jones, because no one has really ever done that. Mm-hmm. He managed to bloody him up and make him look, seriously damage him over the course of the fight. But from a round by round perspective, there aren't a huge amount of arguments to be made that Alexander Gustafsson actually won that fight. I think we're two of the few people that would actually give Gustafsson more of a chance of winning, more of a case for winning the DC fight than the Jon Jones fight.
For sure. Yeah, that was very, very close. It's hard to disagree. I think it was, it's one of those cases where at the very least, if you're still fretting over who deserved to win that fight, take comfort in the fact that Jon Jones was the only one who had very clear rounds on his side. The last two rounds incontrovertibly belonged to Jon Jones. And even though I think Joe Rogan's commentary during the fight had a lot to do with people's perception, I do think commentary affects a lot of people's perceptions of fights. Even despite that, Rogan himself says in the fifth round, Jon would have only had to win one of those first three rounds to win this fight. So, yeah, it was a particularly gun-shy and hesitant and stiff-looking Jones against a Gustafsson who really showed up to perform well and turned out, I think, to be, I do want to talk about this, more of a troubling style or at least physical matchup than we anticipated beforehand. One of the most memorable details about that fight, because it's interesting, right? There was such an underdog there was such a feeling of weightedness in Jones's favor that most of us were thinking, wow, look at how ridiculous the UFC are. They couldn't think of any other angle from which to advertise this fight other than to point out how big Alexander Gustafsson is. And the campaign slogan thing that they sort of went for, the tagline on the poster was greatness within reach. UFC 165, greatness within reach, and the poster emphasized the length of both men's arms. I kind of think they stumbled onto something correct, though, because there is something interesting about the fact that Jones has such a tremendous reach advantage over most fighters that he fights. His style is really built around using it. And a big part of what shocked him, I think, and made him look so uncomfortable in comparison to every other performance we've ever seen from him, in those first couple rounds against Gustafsson was the fact that Gustafsson was able to touch him. There was a lot of Jones like turning his head in that fight and like being visibly uncomfortable with his sense of range, which normally he's so confident and comfortable in. And I think there is something to the argument, like, who are the tallest, longest guys that Jon Jones has fought? Alexander Gustafsson and Ovince St. Preux. And what are his two arguably least impressive performances? Or least polished looking performances? And I would say it's those two. Other factors like preparation play in, but do you think there is something uniquely challenging about a long outfighter like Gustafsson for Jon Jones?
I mean, I'd probably simplify it even further. I don't think that the outfighter part is necessary at all. Yeah, I think you're dead on there. I think there is just a significant element of reach there.
Yeah, not even
it's
a
one
style
of the more
thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think were Alexander Gustafsson a more defined pressure fighter, he would be a much worse style matchup for Jon Jones.
Mm-hmm.
It is pretty much the length, the physicality, and the fact that he can fight long, which makes him a troubling style matchup for Jones. So, I mean, one of the things that we saw in, one of the things that contributed to Jones' myth, and one of the ones which kept him, something which has followed him almost throughout his career and has only even partially started fading away recently, is the idea that he could fight anyone anywhere and beat them anywhere. This kind of bizarre idea that, and this is partially because Jon Jones is a very smart tactical fighter. This has been discussed multiple times on the show. He's someone who adapts incredibly well over the course of the fight, but so when you see him being an incredibly intelligent, adaptable fighter, and then you also see him, fighting people in their areas, a lot of the time fighting people in their areas of strength, it made people think he could fight people anywhere in their strength. He was doing that. He was doing that deliberately. So people would get this kind of, they would look at like him having a grimy clinch war with Teixeira, or a range kickboxing match with Gustafsson, or a wrestling bout with Daniel Cormier, and say, this guy just takes people on wherever they're strongest. He's like the opposite of GSP. He takes them on wherever they're strongest and just beats them there.
Right.
And I never thought this was, well, I might have thought this earlier on, but it started to nag at me more and more that this just didn't seem right. That the more correct way of looking at Jon Jones is that he has simply developed himself in a way that means he sort of has to fight people in very specific places.
Yeah. There's a more unflattering read of that pattern, which is he ends up fighting everyone else's fight. Because you could, if it had been a little more one-sided in his favor, paint the Gustafsson fight the exact same way. You could be like, wow, he chose to take Gustafsson on in a ranged striking battle, I'm kind of with you. That's an interesting point.
Yeah. But because the fundamental, for me, the truth of the matter is that Jones enjoys and has improved over time at being a range kickboxer.
Yes.
And that's fine because he considers himself to be, an invincible MMA wrestler and clinch fighter, and neither of those things have already been proven to be false. He's still one of, probably still the best clinch fighter in the sport. Mm-hmm. But this is the classic thing, we've talked about people moving back and forth between phases before, and Jon Jones, despite his, ability for in the moment kind of on the fly moves, he'll, hold the wrists and kick and knee people in the body, or he'll, his spinning elbows, all his kind of natural interstitial moves have occluded the fact that he is an increasingly siloed fighter. He can fight on the outside and is, perfectly fine there. And he's an incredible clinch fighter, but he has no way of actively getting from one to the other. Mm-hmm. He really has no way of, his clinch entries are not really there in any major way, apart from him he'll basically just put out both arms and just reach for people. This is his clinch entry. He has no kind of way of pressuring into the clinch. So in some ways, he's a lot more like someone like Luke Rockhold than people give him credit for. He's someone who is amazingly dangerous in one area, the clinch, and has very few ways of actually getting there unless his opponent gets there. The rationale of his style is, I'm the best range kickboxer. You're going to try and get past my range kickboxing game, and when you do, my clinch game will be waiting for you.
Yeah.
The question is, obviously, the problem is that there are kind of like, what if the first part of that equation is wrong? What if he's not the best range kickboxer? But also that, people can try and move in past things like the range kickboxing game into a more defined pressure style. And he doesn't really have tremendous ways of dealing with that, I don't think, apart from just hoping that he grabs the clinch or that he can put enough volume on the opponent before they get inside. Mm-hmm. So I think basically to wrap that up, I think, what we're looking at again is, once more, we're going to be looking at another range kickboxing match. But yeah, so what do you think? What are your takes on Jones?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things there really hit home for me. Like this most recent review of this fight, this most recent rewatch, the pressure dynamic really stood out. That one of the biggest things was not the style matchup, as you said. I think Jones's style is fundamentally flawed to make him susceptible to someone who simply just has longer arms. But it was like there were a lot of moments in that first fight where neither guy was able to convince himself to pressure, even though both were being substantially more effective when they were pressuring. When Gustafsson got to back Jones up, Jones did not look all that good off the back foot. And I think that may be something that will change here. I think Jones has genuinely gotten more comfortable, more fluid, and we'll talk about what fluid means. It was a word that Rogan used a lot while calling this fight to compare, how smooth Gustafsson looked and how stiff Jones looked. So I think he has improved in that regard. I think maybe we'll see Jones try to pressure Gustafsson more. I don't know. I honestly don't know how much I trust Jones's ability to strategize or game plan or change things up specifically for an opponent. We talk about him being very game plan dependent. I think he does have to get used at least to the physicality of the person in front of him. But I don't know. If Jones doesn't come out here and try to pressure and back Gustafsson up and really try to make him work way too hard early and make a concerted effort to fight that way, I'm going to kind of be confused. Because I don't know. It seems like he had tons of success when he did that to Gustafsson the first time around. It allowed him to use his kicking game. Gustafsson does not have very good defense. His footwork is incredibly inefficient. So just backing him up gives you all kinds of opportunities, especially for an incredibly varied striker like Jones, to basically land whatever he wants to land, whether he can get Gustafsson down this time or not.
Okay, so we've asked this question before.
Yeah,
I've asked you this question before, and now you've had months to think about what the answer is. I don't think it was actually on a recorded segment, but who is the best pressure fighter that Jackson Wink has produced?
Oh, God.
You've had months, Connor.
Yeah, no, I think
you must have been racking your brains all this time.
I think we already came up with the answer, and it's someone who's honestly whose physical gifts are as much, I think, an explanation as his style. I think it's Carlos Condit.
Yeah. And he's not that
good of a pressure fighter. He's really
he just throws out a lot of volume.
Yeah, he just keeps building layers onto his attack, but it's not like he cuts off the cage really well. It's not like he has a ton of clever ways of closing distance, and he has to have one of the greatest chins ever to fight the way that he fights. Or at least did fight. So, yeah, no, so
I think it's not going to be I don't know if it's necessarily going to be pressure. I don't think Jones is particularly good at striking and moving forward, I don't think he's great at striking and moving backward either. I think he's, much like someone like Cowboy Cerrone, he's very happy just to be sitting at range, flicking out stuff, and people just getting speared as they try and run in on him.
Yeah.
But I think it's less going to be pressure specifically and more just volume.
Yeah, but all the same, I do think there's something like the physicality of Gustafsson was a thing. There are critiques you can make about Jones's style. He is sort of a weird, frustrating amalgamation of fighting techniques at times. But I think there's plenty of reason to think that Jones can win this more comfortably than he did the first time. And I'll give a couple of those reasons now. Firstly, Jones clearly, I buy the I wasn't prepared or training thing because he clearly figured a lot of things out over the course of the fight. He figured out that the head kicks were there. One notable thing is that he figured out that if he just, like the trick to, he sort of hacked fighting off the back foot. He never looked particularly good doing it, but he figured out in the fourth round that if he just threw out a left jab as Gustafsson came forward to attack, it would land like 70% of the time. Gustafsson would just run into it because he is also tall and not used to have, like, Gustafsson's head movement is not good. He comes in head first when he attacks, especially when he's going to the body. Jones had success with that kind of stuff. He had great success attacking to the body, especially kicking to the body when Gustafsson was backing up. I imagine he will hit on those things more quickly this time around. But one of the big things that stood out, I do want to talk about how Jones has genuinely gotten better, I think. I said Rogan kept pointing out the difference in fluidity between the two men. Something that really, really came through watching that first fight this time, was that Jones didn't seem like he knew how to feint or do anything deceptive at all. That to me was a sign that the surest sign that at this period in his career, he was really totally unfamiliar with the concept of an opponent knowing how to bridge the gap. He was like, well, I'm going to be at long range where they can't hit me. I'll just get to pick my strikes. And so his whole striking style in classic Jackson Winklejohn fashion seems to be based on variety, on just attacking whatever target was presented to him and his opponent not being able to keep up with that. And I think Gustafsson really threw him off because he was feinting and moving and changing angles and started to get reads on the fact that Jones just wasn't setting anything up. Every kick, for the most part, in that fight was thrown naked. Every punch was thrown naked. He was trying to change his rhythm a little bit now and then, but he wasn't really deceptive at all. And I think he has definitely gotten better with that. Like watching the most recent Cormier fight, looking at how much more subtly he's able to change his timing and set his opponent up with half beats and half movements. Those are the kind of things I look for when I'm like, has this guy genuinely gotten more comfortable on the feet? I think he has. I don't know how much Gustafsson has improved. I think he more or less offers a lot of the same challenges he did last time, but I think Jones did win that fight. I think he has gotten smoother and more capable of just forcing little tactics into the very obvious gaps in Gustafsson's, significantly less complex striking game. And he can outlast Gustafsson still, I assume. So, I don't know. I think it might be a little more one-sided this time. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in general, Jon Jones has just become he has become a better striker.
Oh, yeah.
Like I said, I think all that time invested in thinking that he's a good striker has made him a decent-ish striker. That he's become he's much more comfortable with return fire once people actually get in on him. Mm-hmm. He's much less likely to something which Gustafsson has never gotten out of the habit of doing. Jones is less likely to do what they both did in that earlier fight and just turn run. He's just a better boxer in general. His ability to play with his jab, left hook, and left to the body was just much better. He just wastes a lot less energy. That's another thing that you just see in the Cormier fight. One of the reasons why he's able to outlast Cormier is that he's just much, much more efficient. Just takes much smaller steps, keeps his eye on the target.
That was even the case in the first Gustafsson fight. He was still looked stiffed and looked like too rote, but he was still, of the two, clearly more familiar with the idea of not putting everything into every strike and just letting things go. Yep.
And just a more attritional fighter in general.
Yeah.
And And yeah, I mean, if you look at Gustafsson, conversely, it's genuinely kind of hard to see where he's much better than he was. I mean, his defensive problems are still the same. His strike selection is mostly the same. I mean, so there are still. This is one of the frustrating things about Jones is that there are still many exploitable ways of there are still clear ways of getting to him. Work attritional damage. If there was someone who was a really just functional technical range kickboxer, I think Jones would struggle with that greatly, because I think his ability to actually set his takedowns up has just rotted.
Come save us, Dominic Reyes.
Yeah, save us, Dominic Reyes. Gustafsson is not much of a body puncher or a leg kicker, and these have always been big, wide open areas of real estate on Jones and on pretty much most tall fighters. That it's I think Gustafsson is someone who is primed to give Jones a competitive fight. Jones is still, obviously, for all his improvements, he's not a particularly strong defensive fighter, and he's not a one-punch knockout artist. So he is going to be stuck in that range kickboxing matchup with Gustafsson, who, for all his many flaws, is someone who puts out quite a lot of volume and hits very hard, and is, Jones doesn't have the tools to not get hit by him. So it's one of those, but in general, I just tend to agree. I think we get the same fight, but I think Jones is just even more. I think Jones won the first one relatively clearly and is more well prepared to win the rematch. Yeah, I think it's always one that's going to be, it's going to be slightly tough for him. He's never going to like not having a major reach advantage. He still doesn't respond well to. His defensive reactions are still not deep and varied, let's say. It's basically always put one hand up and hide behind the shoulder. But yeah, I mean, Gustafsson, unless he lands the shot of his life, it's hard to see him really, how does he do much better than he did last time? Or unless he comes out with a dramatically different game plan. And we've never really seen, of all that, like, Jones is defined by his, for all that Jones's approaches have been sort of defined by his opponent's strengths rather than their flaws. I mean, Gustafsson really does kind of just fight the same way against, with the exception that he'll go to the takedowns if he feels that they're there, but they're not there. Let's just say that if he can significantly out wrestle Jones, something is hideously wrong. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, if he can actually not only take Jones down, which, I mean, clearly the first time there's some element of surprise there, because it didn't happen again in that fight. After the first time, Jones easily sniffed out every other takedown attempt once.
I think he got one sort, one of those kind of bullshit ones where, I mean, they were both kind of bullshit takedowns where nothing happened, but
yeah. But that's the thing, is even if he gets him down again, he's not going to establish control and out scramble Jon Jones. I'd be very, very surprised, or if he does, something is very wrong with Jon Jones. There are a couple of things that Gustafsson could build on from the first fight, but that's the thing, is he doesn't tend to do that. Like, he could invest more in the body. He did have success throwing the body jab in the first fight. He had success sort of countering Jones's kicks with kicks and not letting him get away at that range. But he also had success like that against Cormier, whereas, like, there's a couple moments where it's like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. And the difference is that, like Jones, Gustafsson does better when he has a reach advantage. So for all that it makes Jones look sort of flat in comparison, that he's fighting someone with his reach, it's a problem for Gustafsson too. That suddenly he's fighting someone who can just hit him at the end of his reach. And so, yeah, I think Jones just had an easier time even than Cormier did. Even not fighting the right style, perhaps, against Gustafsson, not pressuring him certainly the way DC did. Jones still had an easier time, by virtue of his build, of keeping Gustafsson from really building momentum. Gustafsson had a lot of spurts of effectiveness in the first fight, but at the end of the day, he kept running into strikes at a range at which he's normally comfortable just sort of standing there. So he had to keep moving, had to keep trying to come up with new ways to get in. I just don't think it's sustainable unless he really intelligently sticks to and emphasizes those tactics that were working for him in the first fight. Yeah. Until I see it,
Yeah.
I have to assume that it's just Jones again, but slightly more easily.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I would say that, one of the better things to do would be for Gus to just shelve all the spastic movement and just try and just bang it out with Jones in the pocket.
Yeah, just try to walk him down.
Don't move elsewhere. Because he kept, whenever he kept circling, he would open himself up to getting, Jones would just kind of sweep him back in front of him with kicks, and they just ended up adding up more and more over time. I mean, if he just literally just sat there and was just said, yeah, let's just have a range boxing match. I'm just going to sit here. I'm not going to run around at all. And I think that honestly might be a much better strategic choice than trying to play his normal style. But I don't really think he's going to do that. So, I mean, I don't know if I trust Jones to finish him. I mean, Jones is a good finisher. He's not a phenomenal finisher.
Yeah. He's very good when he gets the chance to finish you, but he doesn't. Yeah. As time goes on, he creates those chances less and less.
Yeah. And Gustafsson is still ridiculously tough.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we just get a similar fight to the last one. Just, I think maybe Gustafsson's rounds are just, he probably has one good round at the beginning, and then that's kind of it. Mm-hmm. And I think Jones is firmly in the driver's seat by the end.
All right. Well, Jon Jones wins, and you know what? It's hard to think of someone more deserving. So let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the rest of this card. Chris Cyborg versus Amanda Nunez for the women's featherweight title, and Chad Mendez versus Alex Volkanovski after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. As promised, we're moving on to the co-main event, Chris Cyborg versus Amanda Nunez. Phil, your take on this as a matchup? I mean, I think a lot of people would say, of the many frequently pointless seeming super fights the UFC has been able to make, this is one of the best. I would agree with that sentiment, in fact, because there are just no interesting challengers at bantamweight. There sure as hell aren't any interesting challengers at featherweight. Let the two champions duke it out at 145. Why the fuck not? What do you make of the matchup, though? Because, I don't know, have we learned any lessons from this year's glut of smaller fighters moving up to fight their bigger brethren? Like, how much reason do we have to believe that Amanda Nunez is going to have what it takes to beat Cyborg?
So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of interesting factors to look out for with this one. And I think it's definitely one of the more interesting and, like, as you said, kind of pointful super fights that we've seen. Mm-hmm. This is the one where you're just like, yeah, I mean, Jesus, there's really no one else for these women. Let's fucking go. So
that's how you want to be able to describe your super fight, is apropos.
Yeah.
That's how the UFC should be advertising this one. The most appropriate super fight we've ever made.
Yeah. No Cejudo Dillashaw here.
No, Jesus.
But so this is an interesting one because both of these women are so incredibly defined by their physicality. And that seems to be a very significant kind of question moving forward. Is these are both. I don't know if I necessarily want to describe Amanda Nunez as a bully, because it's sort of true and it's sort of not, because she's not necessarily someone who sort of rushes forward and just physically tries to overwhelm people like old school Overeem style. Is that she's much more someone who wants people to be stuck at the end of her reach. But she is someone defined by, her ability to kind of cover distance with her long reach, her ability to just hulk people with takedowns when she needs to, and her ability to just hit freakishly hard for the division.
Yeah. However much of a bully she is, it's very clear that like her physicality is a great comfort to her in matchups. Like,
yeah,
compared to most of her opponents, she's significantly faster, significantly more powerful, and significantly longer than most of the women she fights at 135.
And so the evolution of Nunez has been one of someone who is learning to kind of parcel out her physicality, because the big knock on her in her earlier career was that she would put life-changing beatings on people and then just fold and fade out in the second and third round. And, conversely, we've got Cyborg, who is the most physically overwhelming fighter in sport, pound for pound. Like, for her division.
Yeah.
There's just in terms of the sheer kind of terror and awe she inspires in the people that she fights, you don't get anyone more terrifying. It's like if Francis Ngannou up at heavyweight was actually good.
Or also arguably if heavyweight was even worse.
Yeah, also true. True. So from that perspective, it's very interesting because it's kind of two of the very best athletes at this class going at it. From another one, it's slightly more concerning, and this is okay. So here's the two basic dynamics that just keep jumping out at me. One, Cyborg still hasn't fought a great many like quality strikers.
No.
The best striker she's fought is Holm, and that was it was a razor close win.
Well,
I mean, I had to. I'm sorry. Don't turn off the podcast.
Goodbye, everybody.
Okay.
Happy New Year. Holm's the best striker she fought. Holm did manage to get her licks in. I think did enough to make you ask the question you often have to ask watching MMA, like, how good is this striker really against another striker? But also, Cyborg did clearly win that fight because Holm just wasn't nearly as dangerous in many different ways. Yeah,
and unless you wanted to give Holm huge credit just for holding Cyborg up against the fence.
Yeah.
I mean, in all honesty, like the kind of lesson I learned from that fight was that Cyborg is actually technically a better striker than I might have given her credit for, and Holm was physically more competitive with her than I would have given her credit for being. Like, I was like, Jesus Christ, Holly Holm is incredibly strong was one of the main things I took away from that. But also, like, wow, Holly Holm really isn't that good of a striker.
Yeah, Cyborg striking is, to borrow a term you like to use, her striking looked much more granular and flexible than Holm's did throughout that fight.
Yeah, she was just able to, like, counterpunch with multiple strikes when Holm was coming in. Like, she was completely unfazed by Holm's batting at the air. Mm-hmm. It was, it was a really strong technical performance. But, the question still remains is that Holm's kind of blitzing, counterbaiting, weird style is very different to Nunez, which is much more, Nunez is going to be much more patient, much more looking to sling in hard shots from the outside, and Nunez will have a lot more threat to it for Cyborg than Holm did. She's just a much, much harder puncher.
Yep. And significantly faster. I think like a big detail that's important is that if Nunez has if she will retain one physical advantage, she's going to be facing someone who is in many ways just the bigger version of her. But if she's going to retain one physical advantage, it will definitely be her speed.
Yeah. But on the other hand, my question, the thing is, I keep coming back to the physicality and also the fact that, Holm clearly wanted to wear Cyborg out, for example. She just wanted to, clinch up with her and wear her down because she's incredibly confident in her cardio. And it didn't work at all.
Nope.
It didn't work even slightly, even a tiny little bit. And I just don't trust Amanda Nunez's cardio, like in a fight with someone as physical as Cyborg.
Mm-hmm. Someone who's more relaxed and technical. Like, I think that is true. I think Cyborg is a more technical, more natural striker than Nunez. Maybe not even more natural.
Yeah.
Like at this point, she's just had more experience doing correct striking technique. So she's like, yeah, why would you expect, if this does turn into a dogfight, then Cyborg's technique and composure is going to allow her to outlast Nunez? Probably. If it doesn't, is Cyborg just the more technical striker, so it doesn't matter? You know?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, and just the fact that Nunez's striking style is built from the ground up for a reach advantage, I think. The snap kicks to the body, the long shots. And Cyborg's really actually isn't. I get the impression Cyborg could fight against people who were bigger than her and have less issue than I think Nunez will have. But I think her ability to kind of counter with multiple shots was something that still troubled Nunez against Shevchenko, and Shevchenko was much, much smaller than Nunez.
Yeah.
And I'm still just worried about things like Cyborg's clinch game for Nunez. And just the fact that if someone of equal physicality with Nunez goes strength for strength with her for, 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, can she really keep it up? Because I think her adaptations to kind of keep her gas tank have been technical rather than, overcoming some kind of hard physical limit.
Yeah. It's not like you don't think it's much better conditioning. You think it's strategically, she's just choosing her strikes more carefully.
Yeah, she's just become a much, is the classic Overeem thing. She's become a range kick. She's become a range pot shotter. So I tend to think if Cyborg can just force a physical fight on her, I don't think that the kind of Zingano era Nunez is necessarily that far away.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree. Like, there are issues at times with Cyborg's striking. Like, one of the things that stood out in the Holm fight, for example, is like she forgot her jab. She had someone who was coming in and just giving her things to react to, and she forgot her jab a bit. She was trying to throw these big power punches. She's still really committed to that idea of, I'm going to hit you really hard. But how much more nuanced is Amanda Nunez's striking than Holly Holm's? It's not, actually. I shouldn't even ask that question. What does Amanda Nunez offer, really? She has that snap kick from range, and then there's a 1-2.
Mm-hmm.
And that's almost it in terms of, what she actually offers as a range striker. How much, rhythmic variation and trickiness is there in there? Once you understand that after the left hand, whether it's a big winging left hook or a long jab, that after that there's probably an overhand right or a straight right coming. How long does it take a really experienced striker like Cyborg to sniff that out? And then just the bigger question, the physical matchup, if Nunez does connect, if she does have early success or whatever, but can't finish Cyborg's going to respond with heat, or she's going to tie her up and match strength for strength. And how can Nunez sustain a dogfight any better than she used to? I agree, fully. I'm still not confident in her ability to just outlast a bigger, stronger fighter in a back and forth kind of fight, or one where she is pushing for the finish and can't get it. The first Shevchenko fight was not that long ago that we saw her still, despite her improvements, gas badly in the 3rd round because her opponent finally decided to try and push her. You don't think it'll take?
It was also because she had success, and her own success knackered her. And
that's often been her problem. So either she has big success, and then the chances of her eating herself in pursuit of it go up, or she doesn't. And I genuinely think Cyborg's a more nuanced kickboxer. I think she's got a better, more subtle jab. I think she's a better combination puncher. I think she's more unpredictable. I think she's a more natural kicker. If Nunez's response to so many attacks is to leap straight back, how long do you think it'll take Cyborg to figure out, I throw away the 1-2 and then I kick her in the legs as she moves away? She loves to do that kind of shit. She's definitely going to do that. So I just think Cyborg is not only, a big physical beast, obviously, but has the ability to build an attack in ways that most fighters at bantamweight simply cannot when faced with a physical opponent like Nunez.
Yeah, so, this is it's an interesting fight for me because, in a weird way, because when I first thought about it, I was like, yeah, this should be really interesting. I'm interested to see how, Cyborg's high guard plays with Nunez's ability to kind of slide shots up the middle, and, to see just, what Nunez's power can really do against someone like Cyborg. But like, as we've gotten close to it and I've watched more tape, I've become kind of more convinced of just the default pick in this, which has to be like, I think that Cyborg is just, I think she's just better than her. It's just kind of, I think it's just gonna be a tough fight for Nunez. I think she can probably get some. Again, it's another fight where she's probably going to get her shots in early. She's not the best. She's, as you said, she's not a nuanced kickboxer, but she is a very accurate and powerful one.
Yeah, and she's still going to be faster than most strikers Cyborg has ever faced. So there's definitely some early advantages that will make her dangerous.
But yeah, I just don't see how she can consistently work on Cyborg, who is, as you said, a more subtle, higher volume, more physical force. And I think she's probably going to get finished late.
Yeah, it seems fairly likely. Cyborg does tend to finish people. She's pretty good at it. Have we learned a lesson at this point about super fights? Like, the bigger person just tends to win, right? That tends to be the rule. I don't know. I feel like we're learning this more and more over time. How many fights have we had recently that have bucked that trend?
Which ones could we classify as?
I guess there was
DC
Miocic. That was the big one.
DC Miocic was the.
Yeah. But in most examples, like I don't know. I think of, for example, I don't know. It's whatever. Super fights are dumb. Let's stop doing them. But no, wait. I forgot. I like this one.
You could carve. If you could make some kind of hypothetical 10 pounds lighter version of Cyborg, I would probably still pick her to win this match. Just to say, I don't think this is necessarily a. I think the size and the physicality is definitely an element that will play strongly, but I don't necessarily think of it as being a size and physicality question. I think Cyborg is probably she's just the best fighter at 135 or 145. Yeah,
I tend to agree. All right, well, both of us picking Cyborg, both of us picking Jones. In segment 3, we're going to come back and talk about Chad Mendez versus Alexander Volkanovski and see if perhaps we disagree about that one after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're talking now about Chad Mendez versus Alex Volkanovski. Volkanovski has been on a bit of a tear in the 145-pound division. Let me hear that mouse clicking in the background. Check out his recent record. Since coming to the UFC in 2016, the man is undefeated in 5 straight fights. I think we've seen a lot of potential out of Volkanovski for quite some time. The kind of potential that I really like to see. Like, not just, he's obviously a great athlete and very powerful, but also just a game that makes sense and works, and also one that has been proven to be somewhat flexible and has developed and very clearly improved over time. So Volkanovski, both a technical and a physical threat to a lot of fighters in the stacked featherweight division. Now he's fighting Chad Mendez. The interesting thing is that Volkanovski's only, his real test was Darren Elkins, his most recent fight. And he sure as hell passed it with flying colors. But he still has not fought that many, elite top contenders and top athletes in this division. And Elkins certainly is not on par with someone like Mendez in terms of athleticism. So there's a lot that Chad Mendez brings to the table that's not only similar to Volkanovski, but things that we haven't really seen Volkanovski face before. Mendez's wrestling ability, obviously. Mendez's speed, his power, like his arguably even his striking technique, depending on how much of that shows up in this current iteration of Mendez. There's a lot of stuff I think that Mendez offers that is a genuinely new test for Volkanovski's skill set. So what do you make of this matchup, Phil?
It's a great matchup. It's something you can't afford to miss. It's one of the most relevant fights we're going to see at featherweight, outside of that little log jam with like Frankie Edgar and what's his face, Jabby Man.
Moicano?
Why have I forgotten him? Renato Moicano. Yes, of course. Volkanovski's got to be the next big. He's got to be the next big thing to come after those guys, and this is, Mendez is sort of the lost member of the four kings of featherweight as they were at one point, of Aldo and Mendez and Edgar and McGregor. And I don't know if the UFC knows what to do with him, and so this is kind of another show us what you got match for him against a rising young talent, where if Volkanovski makes it past him, great. They have another exciting Antipodean contender on their hands. And if Mendez wins, then pretty much we just go back to the drawing board, I would guess.
Mm-hmm. So what do you make of the style matchup? I mean, like, a lot of what we've seen out of Volkanovski, like the most impressive shit we've seen from him, his ground and pound. Kind of hard to imagine we're going to get a chance to see much of that in a matchup like this. Like, is he going to take Mendez down and control him with a quarter Nelson and beat him up with one free hand? That seems highly unlikely to me. So how do they match up? Yeah.
So honestly, I think it is a rough style matchup for Volkanovski. And primarily it's because he doesn't really have much in the way of defense. His main defense is just the fact that he's an overwhelming, like, offensive fighter, but he doesn't move his head at all. He doesn't really have much in the way of and whilst he's become a much more kind of comfortable striker, and he can put people into position with kind of kicks and punches, he can kind of kick people into place and then punch into the clinch behind it. He's really someone who seems to thrive on having a physical advantage that he's always had in every one of his UFC fights.
Right.
And that physical advantage is not going to be there. And more than that, he's going to be at I suspect a large speed disadvantage. So, I'm not really sure how he gets this one done, if he does, to be honest. I mean, some kind of... he presumably needs to somehow try and corral Chad Mendez into the fence. That's where things like those kicks come into play, and just kind of put volume on him, and eventually try and just wear Mendez down with volume. I mean, Mendez has never been an incredible cardio fighter. I mean, but even then, he's someone that it's not exactly, he's not someone that it's easy to wear down either. No. But the fact that Volkanovski's plan to get in is pretty much just stalk in behind shots just seems to leave him heavily open to the fact that Mendez can just zip in and clock him as hard as he wants to. Yeah. I mean, I'm curious to see how if Volkanovski gets to pressure Mendez. I really want to know. How does that change this matchup? I suspect it may happen because it's the way Volkanovski likes to fight. And Mendez, for all that he's had game plans in the past that have hinged on him pressuring his opponent, has always been willing to sort of like play off the back foot. He's a counterpuncher, I think by nature. He likes to sort of sit and eye his opportunities and choose his shots carefully. So does that change the dynamic of Mendez being super quick? Like,
because to me, a fundamental question here is not just can he outlast Mendez. I think it's can he clip Mendez, and does he have a better chin than him? Like, I think that is it's a question worth asking. We saw Frankie Edgar knock Mendez out nearly cold. We have seen him suffer the effects of attrition in other fights. And for all that Mendez is, I mean, who are the best punchers that Mendez has faced recently? Have we seen him matched against someone who, hit with a clean shot, is going to swing back and try to nail him in an exchange? Because I do assume we'll see that kind of stuff from Volkanovski. So I think I tend to agree, like, broadly, not being able to work his wrestling, you just have to assume that Mendez is going to be able to cancel him out, at the very least. If not, get Volkanovski down and play a little from top position. Without that in Volkanovski's back pocket, all he has is like pressure counterpunching, is backing Mendez up and throwing back every time he throws. I can see that working, but it doesn't seem like a fun kind of game to be playing against Chad Mendez.
Yeah. So we talked about Miles Jury and how we thought he might be a rough style matchup for Mendez, right?
Did we say that? I think one of us said that.
And you agreed. Shut up. And the thing is, I still don't think it was untrue. I mean, I still picked Mendez. I mean, like, I'm not crazy, but the thing was that Mendez had the way that Jury wanted to fight Mendez meant that he was almost certainly going to get clipped by Mendez at some point. It was just a case of whether he could survive it.
Yeah.
And because, Mendez could come out against someone like Jose Aldo, who has fought him before and who is the fastest and most defensively sound fighter at featherweight ever, and was still able to kind of set traps for him and clock him.
Yeah, you dropped him 30 seconds into their rematch.
Yep. But the thing was that any kind of like Jury can be a tough style matchup for Mendez was predicated on him surviving that kind of first exchange, and the first time where Mendez was just gonna fly out the gate and kind of try and take him out immediately, as it has to be with any one of these fighters, Mendez or Woodley or any kind of, explosive burst fighter.
Yeah.
I think the problem the thing is with Jury is that once it got past that exchange, you could be like, all right, so yeah, after then, Jury could potentially then start laying traps for Mendez. Once he understands that speed and once he understands that kind of the way that Mendez is closing that distance. I do not think Alexander Volkanovski can do that. I think that there's going to be a situation early on where Volkanovski is going to get hit incredibly hard by Mendez. I think this is almost inevitable. And if he survives that, I'm not really sure how he goes about changing the way he would come at Mendez. I don't know how he would avoid that situation happening to him again.
I mean, get way more aggressive, but then does he get taken down?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I have to agree. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, Volkanovski's more dangerous than Jury. I think, too, he doesn't make like the same. Jury has a tendency to be really, really lazy with his defense and things at times, where he's just like.
Yeah, he's a very smug man.
He's very smug, and it comes through in his technique and his style, where he's just like, oh, he feinted that first shot. I can sort of casually step away, assuming the next one won't find the mark. And that's how Mendez knocked him flat. Totally shocked him by managing to land the second punch in a combination merely by being quick and moving forward as he threw it. I don't think we're going to see Volkanovski fall prey to the same kinds of traps. I think he is going to be, from the start, potentially more dangerous to rush in on. I think he's just going to try to throw back hard. And I don't think Volkanovski really knows how not to throw with significant power. But yeah, like stylistically, how does that materialize into like a fight winning sort of game plan? I don't know.
So I don't know if you've got Volkanovski Elkins up or if you've got anything else like. But the thing is that in that fight, I think the first significant strike that lands is Darren Elkins blitzing out at Alexander Volkanovski and landing a right hand on him. Darren Elkins.
Listen, Darren Elkins lands horrible, ugly strikes on everyone.
it's not like, but like he does it in like after he's been punched super hard normally, not like him just rushing out at someone and just landing a shot on them out in neutral space.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I tend to agree. Just with the broad nature of the matchup, we'll see. You know, I don't know. Like, has Mendez deteriorated? Are there questions to be asked? Maybe, but not the kind of things I think you can easily factor into like an analysis like this.
Yeah, I mean, we could end up with a kind of we could end up with a bizarro rerun of kind of Bektic Elkins, where. It wouldn't shock me if we had some weird thing where Mendez just kind of kicked the shit out of Volkanovski for 2 rounds and then just got outwilled.
Yeah. Could be. We're going to find out how tough Volkanovski is for sure. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's the last marquee fight on this card. Any other things we want to just touch on or mention before we wrap it up? Again, I'm going to try to do a bonus episode. May come out the same day as this episode, in fact, just a little later on, covering a few of the other interesting undercard fights. But what stands out? Obviously, on the main card, Carlos Condit versus Michael Chiesa is going to be bleak.
Depressing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So no one wants to see that. What else, though?
I mean, you got to catch the god Ilir Latifi.
Yes.
Against Corey Anderson. I mean, that's the thing. Like, this whole card is interesting in pretty much every fight is interesting in one way or another.
Uh-huh.
Even in the ones which are interesting because you're just going to be watching them through splayed fingers as beloved fighters get sent to the glue factory.
Yeah, don't lie, people, all right? BJ Penn versus Ryan Hall is certainly interesting. It's not good. It shouldn't be happening, but it's definitely interesting. Peter Yan, of course, is probably the highlight of the whole undercard. He's taken on Douglas De Silva, beloved of both myself and Zane Simon, crazy, bricked up little Brazilian slugger. I see no way that could not be an entertaining fight. At the very least, what we saw in Yan's last fight with, I'm going to forget the South Korean fighter.
Jin
Soo Sun, is that putting Peter Yan up against a slugger gives you a good matchup. As long as Douglas De Silva can survive and as long as it takes Yan to adapt to him, he is going to be throwing big shots. He is going to be putting them together in combinations. He's going to get a fight out of Peter Yan. But you kind of have to assume that Yan is just the better at it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, Peter Yan is, like you said, he's the highlight. He's absolute must-watch TV whenever he is on. And he's one of the most exciting prospects in the whole sport at the moment. And, someone who it's hard not to see is on his way to, if not title contention, then getting pretty close to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could see maybe he might get stopped by a really top-end bantamweight athlete, or he could feasibly get into get worn down by a John Lineker or something. But other than that, it's hard to see him losing against someone like Douglas De Silva, D'Andrade. He's one of the better boxers of that class, which is not short on them. He's one of the best clinch fighters around, full stop. His minor weaknesses in defensive wrestling have been shored up. He is just violent as fuck. Yeah,
but De Silva has the maniac factor, all right? Which is not to be counted out. If he just decides to go really fucking crazy, just fights like a buffoon, like a wild animal from the start. I don't know. I think he could actually give some trouble to Yan. He's just that kind of fighter. He's tough to fight for pretty much anyone. So we'll see. I mean,
this thing is Yan is someone who comes out convinced that the other guy just isn't ready for him the whole time.
Exactly.
But he immediately starts playing trying to force people back with 1-2s as soon as the fight starts. Yeah. He's a tremendously confident fighter, and that's not necessarily something you always want to be against big burst athletes who are really coming into their, the prime of their career at this.
Yeah, or you got to find ways to direct that confidence so that it's not. Yeah, there are a lot of moments in a lot of Jan's fights where he gets kind of caught or surprised early and then has to adjust and becomes very serious and then starts whooping ass. But can be dangerous to have that moment against a guy like De Silva. I think it'll be fun to watch. De Silva, he's just a great opponent for any rising prospect kind of fighter. He's going to fight hard. So, good card, big fights, insane bullshit swirling around all of it. But that's MMA, folks. And if you can stomach what's being done to the roster here, and if you can stomach whatever your feelings on drug testing, if you can stomach all of that surrounding this, then there will be some good action to behold. Again, check out the Heavy Hands Patreon this week. There is going to be some bonus content coming at you, I assure you. So make sure you listen in. Thank you for waiting an extra day to listen to this episode, and we hope that all of you had a wonderful holiday time, whether you celebrate Christmas or not. And boy, what else? Do you have anything that they should check out, Phil, my friend?
So it was interesting, as the tornado of bullshit really spun up around this event, seeing some of the people starting to freak out about how all their work on Jones was going to go to waste, and they'd written up, hefty technical articles and so on. So, like a lot of those other people, I had and have a kind of piece, a long piece on Jones in the works, but mine was less from a technical perspective and more on how he is a huge repetitive fuck up who can never ever be trusted.
Well, it's irrelevant now.
I was feeling a little less kind of pressured by the fact that Jon Jones was looking like he was gonna take down another UFC event. So keep a lookout for that one. I'm gonna try and get it out within the next couple of days. It's probably the eternal Jon Jones, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it.
Hell yeah. Looking forward to it. I'm working on something kind of similar. I'm looking at basically a somewhat less technical revisiting of the first fight between Jones and Gustafsson to examine why we thought it was so close and competitive, how it really played out, and what it might mean for this second fight. So keep your eyes out for that this week as well. We'll probably be coming out shortly before the fight, likely on Friday. But again, thank you all so much for waiting for this episode. Head over to the Patreon, listen to that bonus shit, and until next week's episode, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. Happy New Year.